Welcome to this presentation of the Rotary Club of North Bethesda, Maryland, USA. Our club was established in 1974. We meet every Friday morning at 7:45 a.m., and we often invite guest speakers to give presentations on all kinds of interesting subjects. Please contact us through our website at nbrotary.org. And thanks for watching. Our speaker today is Ron Kaltenbaugh, president of the Electric Vehicle Association of Greater Washington, D.C. He will be introduced by North Bethesda Rotary Club member Linda Bergcross.
And to introduce you to our Rotary Club. Ron has a master's degree in computer science and works as a network engineer for a Fortune 500 company. He's president of the Electric Vehicle Association of Greater Washington and is chair of the Frederick County Sustainability Commission. In March of this year, or which I mean last year, I guess, Ron attended a Climate Reality Project conference in Denver, Colorado, and has been refining and making the presentation on climate change and electric cars to a variety of audiences. I introduce you. Go ahead, Ron.
Thanks for the introduction, and thanks for having me speak to the group. Quick update. I was chair of the commission. We rotate out, and so I'm still on the commission, but not chair. And it was great that 3-minute talk lead-in was actually, I couldn't have set it up better because this really ties in well. And so I'm going to talk about electric vehicles, and I really have two hats on here. I'm involved in a lot of things, environment and climate and electric vehicles. As was mentioned, EVADC is a local group that we're all volunteer owner advocates that promote EVs for lots of reasons. And then the Climate Reality Project, where I started doing presentations around climate change. On the screen here, you see my email address. And if you think of a question afterwards and want to ask me about it, if you have other opportunities or people that want to hear about electric vehicles or climate, reach out. If you forget the email, Linda has it. And you see in the pictures there a little bit of my history with EVs. Our first EV in 2012 was a Nissan Leaf, 84 miles of range. And then we go, today we have a Bolt, the red car, which is 230, and a Tesla Model 3, which is the blue car, the dark blue car there, which is just over 300. So I've been through a lot of changes in the EV space. So a brief history comment on what EVADC is. We cover the greater DC area, so the Virginia suburbs, most of Maryland, and we even have some members in Delaware that are starting their own chapter, but they're kind of a part of us for now. And we're a chapter of a larger organization. Our chapter started in 1980, and until about 10 years ago, the focus was all about DIY conversions, taking the guts out of a gas car and making it electric. And we have some people that still do that, but now we focus on mostly commercial vehicles. And we do things like this. We work on promoting legislation that's EV friendly, science fairs, all kinds of stuff. And coming up in the fall, the major project for the national set of groups is National Drive Electric Week. And that's where we try to do a lot of events and focus on getting out to where people are and getting people exposed to EVs. So a brief bit of EV history. And this always amazes folks. And if I'm doing this in person, I do a little bit of a guessing game here, but it's a little hard to do over Zoom. But the first recorded efforts around an EV were in 1834. By a man by the name of Thomas Davenport created an electric car. The batteries were not rechargeable. He didn't try to sell this thing. It was more of a science experiment. But that's how early this goes back. And then in the 1800s, there are a variety of efforts around this. Thomas Edison was involved. The first race in America was won by an EV. And in 1900, cars were basically in 3 categories: steam, EV, and gasoline. And there was a real battle to see which would win. And the first speeding ticket was given to someone in an EV in 1903. So there's a lot more of that, but I could do a whole talk on the history, but I just wanted to give you some sense that this has been a topic for a long, long time. So I'm going to talk about a bunch of topics around EVs and get into these in detail. So we'll just keep moving on here. So when we talk about EVs or electrified vehicles, a couple different things come to mind here, and there's no exact term that's defined here. There's different terms we use, but typically when we say electrified vehicles, that's going to include hybrids. If we say electric vehicles, it tends to mean there's a plug. Now, not everybody uses these terms the same way, but a hybrid is the way I'm defining it here is a car with usually a gasoline engine, an electric motor, and a small battery, no plug. It just charges that battery from recapturing energy from the brakes, coasting, and things like that. And the motor gives the gasoline engine an assist, so it can be smaller and more efficient. Generally, they can't go drive on their own without the gas engine. The plug-in hybrid adds a larger battery and a plug so you can charge it outside the car. And these can go some distance on electricity alone, anywhere from 10 to 50 miles. And then you have full battery electric, which means you ditch the gas engine and the muffler and the catalytic converter and a whole bunch of stuff. And it actually makes for a much simpler design and engineering. There's a lot of benefits from EVs. The lower fuel and operating costs, lower maintenance costs, no tune-ups and oil changes and mufflers to take care of. It's mainly tire rotations and brake checks, wiper fluid, things like that. So you have lower maintenance and lower fuel costs, which makes the operating cost much lower than a gasoline vehicle. One great benefit is the performance. Because you have instant torque from an electric motor, the acceleration is very good to fantastic. And while this can be fun and make it fun to drive, it's also an important safety advantage. For those you live in Bethesda, most of us, mostly in the group, and anybody when you merge onto the Beltway knows what it's like to try to get into that gap in traffic. Well, if your car has more get up and go and more instantaneous get up and go of an EV, it's much easier to merge into a freeway. Cleaner than, and we'll get into more of that later. And then for those interested in concerned about foreign policy and those kinds of things, we're using, except for a little bit of Canadian hydro, pretty much U.S. generated electricity. So that's a plus as well. So there's going to talk about charging a little bit. There are three kinds of charging, or three levels of charging. And there's a lot of detail here. And I'm not going to go into all of this because, again, this could be a topic in its own. But basically, there are level one charging is any common outlet. So that can be in your garage or anywhere. And the amount of electricity you get here is pretty small. So you're going to get 3 to 5 miles of range per hour. And this doesn't sound like very much, but it's very useful for if you have a plug-in hybrid especially, or even a full battery electric. If you charge your car overnight, or let's say you go to the beach and you have a full EV, you get there on Friday night, plug your car in, it's sitting there all weekend because you're not driving anywhere. It's full by the time you leave at the end of the weekend. So this can be useful in a lot of situations. Workplace charging was another opportunity for this, and it fits a lot of use cases. The most common charging is probably level 2, and this is what I would refer to as a dryer circuit. The range that you get is going to depend a lot on the number of amps and the car. Typically, it's around 25, 28, but it can range from 12 to 46 generally. And this is what people generally put in their garage. And the great thing about investing in these is generally once you invest in one of these units, it's usable for any car you might get in the future. And then lastly, those 3 plugs you see down below there in the bottom right-hand corner, that's for DC fast charging. And that's for high-speed charging anywhere from 50 to 200 miles in half an hour. Different cars have different connectors for this. And that's the one place where you have to worry that your car matches the charger in question. So there's a lot of ways to find public charging. And one of the most common is an app called PlugShare. PlugShare is available as an app for your smartphone and also as a website. So you can go to plugshare.com anytime you want and look around and see what's available. And this shows you where there's charging. You can put in an address and see what's there. In this map, the DC area, and actually I took this screenshot a couple months ago, so there's more now, I'm sure. The orange circles are fast chargers. The green ones are level 2 chargers. And this lets you find out where there's charging. And you might be surprised that what's there you don't know about, because oftentimes chargers are off to the side or around back and you don't see them. So unless you need chargers, you may not notice them. They're not as noticeable and big, and as a gas station, it's kind of in your face. And so there's a couple different networks around charging I want to mention. One is, you may remember the Dieselgate scandal that VW experienced a few years ago, where they did a bunch of cheating on emissions. They paid a heavy price for that, which actually probably one of the heaviest prices that companies ever paid for an environmental harm. They didn't just get slap on the wrist for this. One of their penalties was a required $2 billion investment in EV charging. And they're still working on this. And this is a picture as of February of their US network they've built for charging. This is a picture of the, Tesla has their own Supercharger network. And so you can drive basically, and this is just the US, the North America picture. They have a lot in Europe and other places as well. But you can go most anywhere in the US with relative ease with one of the Tesla vehicles. So let's switch gears and get into a little bit more around the efficiency of EVs and why EVs are better than gasoline cars. So one of the things that all electrified vehicles do, including hybrids, is something called regenerative braking. And this is where you don't waste that energy from braking. So in a normal gas or diesel car, when you put on the brakes, it's basically friction that is, the brake pads are going, compressing against the rotor, and friction stopping the car. And all that energy is wasted. You heat up the brake pads, so you got a lot of heat, and that's just, doesn't get recouped. Well, with regenerative braking, you actually capture that energy, and the electric motor runs in reverse and becomes a generator and puts that energy back into the batteries. So you recover a lot of energy. And so this means that depending on the terrain, you can actually, come home with more miles on in your car than you left with. Obviously, that's not a normal case, but it does happen from time to time. It's kind of a fun thing. But it also means that your brakes last longer because you're not using them, the friction part, nearly as much. The friction part of the brakes are mainly used for that last little bit of a stop or an emergency stop. And so they last a lot longer, less brake dust in the environment, and less expense on brake replacements. So this chart is a real, it's a chart for energy geeks and wonks and nerds and stuff. But it's about all the energy used in the United States. But I want to stress just one thing, and maybe hard to see on a small Zoom screen, but hopefully you can see my mouse here. This is basically showing energy and how it gets, where it comes from, how it's used. And the boxes over here on the right are, the light gray is rejected or wasted energy, and the dark gray is useful stuff, energy services. And you can see that we waste about 2/3 of our energy. Now, you're always going to have waste because of heat and friction and that kind of stuff. But notice here in transportation, the percentage of waste is much higher. It's like 4-to-1 wasted versus useful stuff. And I'll come back to that in just another slide or two. And this goes back to the inherent inefficiency of a gasoline or diesel car. And this shows some of the losses you get. And a lot of this, like I said, is friction and heat and braking and stuff. And so the bottom line is that power to the wheels that does useful stuff, it's roughly 20% of the energy actually does move the vehicle. The rest is wasted or lost. Whereas in an EV, after you account for regenerative braking, recapturing some energy, it's around 80%. So that ties in with the earlier graph. And this is where we can actually use a whole lot less energy to move our vehicles when they're electrified. And so I want to give another example here that when I did this, first time I did this for a slide, I had to do the numbers a couple times because it just blew me away. Probably most of you have replaced your light bulbs, or at least most of them. But if we think back to a 100-watt light bulb, the old incandescent style, and if we replace that with a new modern LED that takes 15 watts, how does the savings compare? What can we do with that amount of savings? That's what I'm going to show here. So we have one light bulb, and I said its average is on is 5 hours a day. A typical EV can go 3.5 miles on a kilowatt of electricity. So if you look at the old light bulb, it's going to use roughly 182 kilowatt hours in a year, running 5 hours a day. The new one's going to run a little over 27. So your savings in electricity is 155 kilowatts from one light bulb. So that just tells you the story of how efficient and great these new bulbs are. Well, if you do the math, that one light bulb, the savings from it, could power an EV for a little over 500 miles of driving. It just shows you the efficiencies, and this is about not just electric vehicles, but also LEDs. When you use more efficient stuff, the savings are tremendous, and it really does add up to be quite impactful. So another key thing to think about here is that EVs get cleaner over time. As the grid gets cleaner, your EV is going to get cleaner. Whereas a internal combustion engine, we refer to them as ICE cars in the EV space, they get dirty over time because we're using unconventional like tar sands oil. We're also the wear and tear on the car that gets a little less efficient. And most people can actually, if you want to get even cleaner, you can choose wind power or put on solar panels and actually have even more, even a greener experience. This map from the Union of Concerned Scientists shows the miles per gallon that an EV needs to get to be as clean as a gasoline car compared to the grid. And you can see here that this is the miles per gallon that gasoline car, compares the grid to a gasoline car. And you can see that in the worst areas here, it's in the high 30s, whereas, even your, even like your Prius and stuff is far higher here. And so the key here though is that the grid is moving forward. And so this is from 2014. And so the key here I want to show is the next slide. And that is this slide here. So here we can see that in just 4 years, a lot more of the grid is actually so much cleaner. And almost all of it is over 50 miles per gallon equivalent. And so that means two things. One, we've made a lot of progress, but it also means that the EV you bought in 2014 is now cleaner than it was when you bought it because of the grid improvements. So, how much, not many things get better like this as they get older, but an EV will because the grids are constantly getting better. That's the key here. So there's a lot happening beyond just personal vehicles. Electric buses are coming on strong. I'm up in Frederick County, and I'm proud to say that my county was the first in Maryland to have some electric buses in its transit fleet. That's picking up steam all over the county and all over the country. We're way behind other countries, especially China, who have 5 years ago already had 100,000 electric buses. So we have a lot of catch up to do here, but there's a lot of potential benefit here for saving money long term, for health improvements, and addressing climate. And even big trucks like garbage trucks are starting to come out. This truck was put into service a little over, actually 2 years ago now in Seattle. So that's pretty impressive. And other things are in development like semi-trucks and even airplanes. And so airplanes are, the big problem there is battery weight, but that's, especially for small planes, those are in the works and should be coming along in the next couple of years. I don't think we're going to get to like an electric 747 style plane anytime soon, but we may get to a more of a hybrid model where it has some batteries to help assist and lower the footprint in the next 10 or 15 years for that. So winding down a little bit here, we're going to touch on some other bigger topics around electric vehicles. And this is one of the reasons why I'm so involved in this and how my efforts around climate and EVs come together is that transportation is still a sector where the impact of CO2 in the sector is still a little bit growing. Power, we know how to decarbonize. With transportation, we got to get moving on electrifying vehicles, and it's now the largest sector for CO2 pollution. And one of the key things here, you may have heard the term externality. And so this is basically a cost or benefit that affects a third party who didn't incur that cost or benefit. And so in my example here, honeybees are a positive externality. If I have honeybees and I pollinate your garden, you've gotten a benefit for something I did. Whereas a neighborhood pig farm, the pig farmer is making lots of money, but the neighbors suffer the consequences. Well, the pollution we have from our gasoline cars is an externality that's not paid for by, evenly by the people that are impacted by it. And one of the things we also look for in climate solutions is co-benefits. And so moving to electric vehicles has a lot of benefits around climate. Ultimately, they're less expensive, but there's a big issue and a big benefit around health. And research is showing that air pollution is much worse than we thought for our health. And electrifying transportation is a key way to reduce the pollution and improve our health. And here's some recent reports that came out back in the fall around health benefits of EVs. So when you're choosing an EV, you've got lots of options. SUVs and trucks are a little bit limited right now, but there's a lot coming out this year and next. COVID slowed down things a little bit, but you're going to see an F-150. I'm not sure if that's going to be this year or not. It got slowed down with COVID, but could be this year, next year probably. Silverado. They're bringing back the Hummer as an EV. Now, a lot of these will be really expensive at first, just like with EV cars, but they'll come down in price as they get economies of scale and so forth. Think about your driving patterns if you're thinking about looking for a car. Maybe create a log or a diary. And you'll find that the range that so often concerns folks is not nearly that much of a concern. You can use tools like PlugShare I mentioned before to kind of look where there's charging, where you go and see where you might charge the vehicle. And the one thing I can't stress enough is don't let that one special case a year keep you from going electric. You can always rent a vehicle for that 1 or 2 times where you need something, for a long road trip, or, the people I meet that says, well, they get a truck because they want to be able to bring home something from the store. It's like, well, how often do you actually do that? Is it worth the expense of that truck? And if you want the truck, that's a different story, but maybe you don't really need it for that special case. So in summary, EVs are growing and growing fast, and many automakers have announced plans to end production of gasoline cars. Now, these are plans, and so we can't count on this. We have to keep up the pressure. But I think in many cases, some of them are very, very solid plans. Some of them are a little nebulous, but they're all headed in this direction. EVs are not only cleaner, but they're just better vehicles. So one of the things I'll often hear about climate solutions or things that are going to EVs is the sacrifice you make from doing the quote unquote environmentally friendly version of something. Well, here's a case, and like many cases though, this solution is actually better. As a 2 EV family right now, I can say that it's just a better driving experience. Quieter, great torque, just more room for the inside than a normal vehicle of the same outside dimensions. It's just a better experience. The purchasing costs are still a little higher in most cases, not all, but the operating costs already make them less expensive over time. And so as the price comes down in the initial purchase, it becomes an even better deal. And as I said, there are dozens of models today and more on the way. So this is a handout that my group has. We do this, and we actually have the 2021 version we just put out there, and it's available. If I was in person, I'd be handing out sheets for you, but it's available. It's a 2-sided sheet. One side has electric vehicles, the other one has plug-in hybrids, and it shows all the specs. It's available on our website at the link you see there. And let me do one last thing and switch over to and show you something on the website. So this is the page I'm referring to. It has a whole bunch of stuff, and here's that info sheet, and there's other things on here as well. There's also a link to our YouTube channel. And we just did a series of videos for the Montgomery County Green Fest, which is virtual this year. And so these are something to check out. And the one I want to highlight is this first one here. It talks about the whole supply chain for oil and gasoline, and how the pollution from driving a gasoline car isn't just the pollution from your tailpipe when you drive it. It's the whole process of getting and making gasoline, and it's quite telling and eye-opening to see all those impacts. So that's my what I have for today, and take any questions.
Yes, I have one. First of all, thank you for your presentation. It was outstanding. And you don't have to convince me. There's no question that electrical vehicles are the future. And they're mechanically, I don't think most people are aware, there are very few moving parts in an electrical vehicle. It's less than a dozen. And compared to thousands for the gasoline powered vehicle. So the maintenance issue is a huge, huge advantage on them. And they are less expensive. But the problem I'm having is I live in the mountains. I make trips out there. I need an SUV. I need something that can carry, because I move twice a year. Mm-hmm. When are they going to have an SUV available that's electrified?
So those are basically SUVs and trucks are coming later than cars, just because they're bigger vehicles, so they take more energy, more batteries, and so batteries need to be better and cheaper to get there. There are a couple of choices now. The two I would say is, so Ford came out with their Mach-E, which they market as it's kind of a crossover type style, and so that's something you might want to look at and see if its size meets your needs. The other one that I can highly recommend is the Tesla Model Y. So I have a Tesla Model 3, which is a 4-door sedan with a trunk. The Model Y is a crossover. It has a hatch. It has quite a lot of room, and it does come in all-wheel drive as one of the options. One of the things to think about, and I wish we were doing this in person so we could walk outside and see the car. In general, an electric vehicle has more room on the, if you had two vehicles with the exact same wheelbase and length and sit them side by side, and one was gasoline and one was electric, almost invariably the electric model would have more space inside, just because you don't have that transmission tunnel at all, because of the way things work. The engine compartment can be smaller. You just have more physical interior space in the same size car in an EV. So don't judge the interior space by looking at it and thinking about what you're used to from a gasoline car. Now, it's not a massive difference, but it is going to be larger. So the volume in a Tesla Model Y, for example, and I haven't seen the Mach-E in person, so I can't comment, but it should be pretty good as well. It's a lot of room. What vehicle do you have today, Kent?
Excuse me?
What vehicle do you have today?
I have a 2010 Pilot.
Pilot. Okay, so I'm pretty sure that the interior volume of the Tesla Model Y would be very comparable to the Pilot, and the Mach-E should be as well. I just haven't seen it in person. And there are more coming. And so our info sheet that I put up there, I'm gonna put that in the chat as well. That's something to look for and see what's on the list. And on there also, it refers to my group meets. We're meeting virtually now, but we meet once a month, and we're always happy to have folks come and ask questions. And you can reach out to me or look online at our website. We'll be doing more and more in-person events, and there'll be people there that'll we'll keep you abreast of new models and such.
Klaus Rinn here. I have a question about electrical cars and hybrids, and I pat myself on the back for driving a hybrid car. You may know the Volvo S90, the T8, but I'm wondering sometimes if I'm fooling myself. I'm thinking about those batteries. Well, first of all, I'm thinking about all of that electricity that has to be generated somehow to power these cars. And I think about the batteries that have to be manufactured, and I'm thinking about the environmental impact of that. And also the batteries will have to be discarded at some point. And I'm wondering about the impact on the environment of that. And I could continue the list. And so I'm asking myself, am I fooling myself?
So here's where, and I didn't have enough time to get into all the topics I wanted to, but when it comes to, so I had a hybrid before I had my EVs. I had a Honda Civic hybrid, which we really liked, and so hybrids is definitely a great step because you're using less, less gasoline than you otherwise would. On the batteries are interesting. For one, batteries will generally have probably 3 lifetimes. So a battery in an EV, once it's for whatever reason no longer useful in that EV, it's still going to have a lot of useful life in it for other use cases. And there are already examples of people. I know someone took a bunch of old Prius batteries and put them together and created a battery pack for I think it was a ranger station or a fire tower, so you have off-grid power. So you can still use them for that. And so we're still in the relatively early days. So in the modern EV era, there aren't a lot. They're only 2011 when most of these started coming out. So not a lot of cars they're rolled over from their first use. But you're going to have use cases where you take the old batteries and reuse them, back up for a cell tower, back up for a home solar system. There's all kind of possibilities that people are working on. And so that's life number 2. Then life number 3 is the materials in those batteries are valuable. And so we already recycle a significant portion of the materials in lead acid batteries for our starters in our cars. And the material in EV batteries is much more valuable than that. And so there are people working on recycling opportunities to recapture those materials and use them in making new batteries. So you have to do less mining of materials. So the concern that, we have to make sure we do this right, and we have to make sure that these things happen. But there's every indication, and there's lots of effort on the fact that we're not going to have like massive amounts of batteries going into landfills, polluting the environment. There's just the economics alone tell you that won't happen. So,
what are the materials? Modern batteries.
So there are different. So today most batteries are for EVs are lithium ion. So there are. So obviously lithium is part of that, but there's also nickel. Some have manganese. Cobalt is in a lot of batteries, though they're trying to reduce the cobalt because it's expensive. It's mining of it is problematic. So that's going down. And then there's a lot of different chemistries out there, and so I don't know all the ins and outs of all of those. But those things are one of the things right now that's holding back some of the manufacturers is they don't have a large enough battery supply to move as fast as they probably could. One of the advantages Tesla has among many is that they started out building and batteries as part of their core business, so they have a leg up on everybody else when it comes to battery supply.
So Ron, just following up this question that Bruce just asked, because the lithium ion or lithium shortage in the world right now is tremendous. And so the lithium, which is, I think, if I'm not wrong, correct me, about 70% of lithium is in the western states of the United States. And the mining of that is going to cause serious problems, environmental problems. The second, as you mentioned, the electrical batteries or electrical generation, the manganese and cobalt and lithium and some other metals. So when you discard these batteries, eventually this is going to create another environmental hazard. So there are pros and cons of this. So I think the question that Clay asked is relevant. Are we just substituting one problem over the other, irrespective of the cost?
Well, that's where I think you have to compare that. So when you look at the electric vehicle and making batteries versus powering a gas car with oil, that's why I highlighted that one video there showing the oil production pipeline and how you basically get from oil in the ground to gasoline in your car. So whenever you do that, so both powering both vehicles requires mining and extraction of materials. So in the case of a gasoline car, you're exploring and drilling for oil, you're pumping it up, you're refining it, you're transporting it multiple times. But once you consume that oil, it's gone. You've consumed it. You don't get to reuse it. You're constantly having to do new drilling, new refining to get new oil for your power your vehicle. Whereas with a battery, you mine the materials, and hopefully we learn our lessons and we don't let companies do bad practices. We can do these things safely if we invest properly. So that's the first thing. You mine the materials, you make the batteries. Now that battery gets reused, not just one trip, but you're using it for years in the vehicle. It's not consumed up and gone. And then once it's done life living in the vehicle, you find a use for it, like I said, in a stationary application, and then you recycle it. So yes, I mean, anything we make has an impact. There's no way around that. But you have to compare what you're trading off. And so that oil production is a consumed thing. You consume it one time and it's gone. Whereas in the case of the batteries, you make them, you use them for years and years in the vehicle, you use them for years and years a second time, and then you recycle the vast majority of it to make new batteries, so that the second generation of batteries, you've mined a lot less, and so the cycle goes on. So
anyway, my understanding is that aluminum, there's a lot of research going into using aluminum for batteries.
Yeah, and I'm not a battery expert by any means. So but I come across it all the time being involved in the EV space. There is so much research going into batteries. Between our consumer electronics devices, EVs, grid storage, and some other things, batteries are one of the key technologies driving us forward in the future. And so there are lots of applications and lots of research. Now this will innovate in different ways. So for example, in a cell phone or in a smartwatch like I have here, those cycles are faster because it's a much lower cost product. You can cycle through innovations, model year to model year. And so the improvements come quicker. In big things like vehicles, you've invested a lot of money in that vehicle. So the production takes longer to, bring in new technology. So the cycling takes longer. But there's all kind of new chemistries, all kind of new opportunities. So batteries are only going to get better performing and less impact. So for example, I mentioned cobalt before. There's lots of reasons to not want a lot of cobalt in batteries, and the amount of cobalt is going down, and cobalt-free batteries are probably in the late research stage and should be around soon. So there's lots of improvements coming in this space.
This is Ron Sigelman. When do you think the technology in terms of charging will come up to the use? In other words, like you're going to visit a relative in Frederick, let's say, will you just plug into their in-house electricity and charge up? Or will you have to go to a charging station? Or is the technology moving along as quickly as the electric car technology?
Yeah, it's a good question. So, and I've experienced going from like I said, the 84-mile range Leaf to a second Leaf that was 110, and then our Bolt 230 and the Tesla now just over 300. And so today, most EVs you buy today, except for some city cars which aren't offered in the U.S. very much, but most of them are over 200 miles of range. And so with a 200-mile range car, you can probably get anywhere you're driving where you're going for the day. Even if you're going to the beach and back from the DC area, you're probably able to get there and back without having to stop to charge at all. And at most one stop, and probably not even that. So for your daily driving needs, the key is, where's your home base for charging? If you have off-street parking where you can put in a charger at home, that's easy to do, inexpensive, and you're set. The challenge here is around people in apartments and condos, because oftentimes it can be harder to charge for those folks. And that's the biggest challenge around that kind of charging. And then for road trips, as I showed in those maps, there's like large networks of places that are located along interstates and stuff that provide high-speed charging. And so the key around that is around, and I have a friend who just got a Tesla Model Y back in March. Her and her husband, they're retired. I think they're probably in their early 70s. And 2 weeks later, after getting this EV, they took a road trip to Arizona to visit family. So with very little experience driving the new car. And I talked to her about it when she got back, and I gave her some pointers, and she asked me some questions. And one of the things they learned was that doing a road trip in an EV is the main difference is around planning. So unlike in a gas car where you just basically, when the gauge says you need to stop, you find a gas station and stop. The main difference is you plan a little bit more. And I've done road trips, not cross country, but to New England or to Detroit, things like that, 1,000-mile distances. And the main thing you do is you have to figure out, well, I'm going to plan my charging stops for when I take a break to eat, for example. And so when I go to Vermont to go skiing, it's usually a 2-stop charging situation. I stop usually somewhere around Scranton, plug in, get lunch. Lunch takes longer than the car takes to get ready to go to the next location. And then one shorter stop, maybe 15, 20 minutes somewhere in Connecticut or Massachusetts, and I'm good to go. So the key the key difference is around planning.
So
Awesome.
what does it cost you?
One second, Joe. So, and I'll let you ask your question. We are at the bottom of the hour. For those that need to go, please feel free. I thank our speaker, and I appreciate your presentation. It's very interesting and enlightening. And Joe, I'll go back to you to ask your question. So those that want to stick around and ask questions, please feel free.
Thank you. Thank you. So when you filled up in Trenton for another 200 miles, is that right?
Roughly, yeah.
What did it cost?
So charging costs are, charging at home is always gonna be the least expensive because you're getting rates, home rates. The key around when you're charging high-speed charging, I won't get into the details because it's open up a whole can of worms and we didn't, I don't want to be that long. But it's going to vary. The best example I can give you is a real world example, because the rules vary in different states of how you pay for electricity. It gets complicated. But we had a trip to Detroit for a science fair event my daughter was in high school, and the other families that went in their vehicles, I asked them how much they spent on gasoline for the trip. So Detroit and back, driving around Detroit, probably 1,200 miles roughly. Most of the families spent between 130 and 150 bucks on gasoline for that trip. My cost to charge our Tesla Model 3 was $42.
Great.
So it was definitely less.
I think the question is really, and maybe you may have an answer for this, the cost of generating the electricity for charging stations where whether it's electricity generated by coal power plants or by hydroelectric or even the wind power and so on, the alternate energy sources. So overall, the cost of generating the electricity in order to use this for charging, is any kind of economics have been worked out, whether it is really cost effective in a short term it may be, but a long term it may be a serious problem?
No, actually the costs are getting better as we go along. So already so there's something called the levelized cost of energy, which is basically for producing energy, what's the all-in cost, basically building the power plant, whatever kind it is, operating it for X number of years, all the fuel and so forth and so on. And these days, in much of the world, solar and wind is already less expensive than just operating a coal plant. Mm-hmm. And in some cases, even just operating a natural gas plant, let alone all the costs to build the thing. And solar and wind are getting cheaper year by year, whereas the cost for the old fossil fuel plants is not getting cheaper. If anything, it's going up. So the cost per unit of electricity out of solar and wind is definitely on a downward trend and generally cheaper than for fossil fuel energy. So once you look at that, and you can compare gasoline to electricity, and so a typical EV gets around 3.5 miles. Let's call it 3 miles just to make math easier per kilowatt of electricity. So that means for, let's say, a Prius, which is 50 miles per gallon, that's 17 kilowatts of electricity. And at the national average of, that's roughly $2 a gallon gasoline when you do the math. And that's for a hybrid that's one of your highest mileage performing vehicles, that let alone, most of the other cars, which are like get half that mileage. So the math is definitely in favor, economics are in favor fuel wise for the EV. And those costs are going down where the gasoline costs are flat or going up.
Okay, thank you.
I live in a high-rise condominium, and we are right now installing a dual head charging station at the front of the building where you can it's the fast charge where you can plug in using your credit card, pay for the gas right there.
Yeah, one of the things that will happen for a lot of apartment and condo dwellers is, I've been talking to folks. I met with somebody 6 months ago who was a developer for condos and buildings like that, and we've been encouraging them to, when you're building new properties, put in some wiring for charging up front.
Get ready for it. Right.
Yeah, because doing it at construction time is a fraction of the cost of doing it after the fact and tearing up concrete and pavement and stuff like that. And so if you build it in up front, all the wiring, then putting in charging as you need it becomes very inexpensive, and it becomes an amenity that's going to attract people to your building.
Exactly.
And so the one thing for people that live in condos and apartments, or refer to them as MUDs, multi-unit dwellings is the term that's used in the business. People that live in those kinds of buildings, they may need to use more fast charging, which means they're saving. Fast charging is the most costly way to charge. So their savings from having an EV may be less than somebody who can charge at home or at work. But they also may be driving less, so it may not matter so much.
Okay, folks, we have time for one more question, and then I'm going to have to close this off.
Well, just a quick comment, if I might. It seems to me, with the price of gas being driven up to what I recently read is a target of $6 a gallon, that there will be a rather rapid conversion to EVs as people look for the economy of saving. Yeah. So there'll be a lot of incentive for manufacturers to improve things. But thank you very much. It was a wonderful presentation and very informative.
Yeah, just to expand on what you said there. I think the country with the biggest adoption of EVs is Norway. One of there's two reasons. One, Norway has been pushing it with policy, but also I think gasoline in Norway is $8 to $10 a gallon. And so the economics become a no-brainer in that case. And we don't, at $2, $3, even $4 a gallon, we're not paying the true cost for gasoline. We're not paying for all the harms it causes. If we took all those externalities of the pollution and the health impacts of gasoline and layered it on top, people would go to EVs in a heartbeat, because it would just be a no-brainer.
Interesting.
Okay, well, Ron, thank you so much. Excellent presentation. And I just should mention, I have been driving a Prius since 2001. I'm now on my fifth one. And that was one of the early ones. And I also have PV panels on my roof. So I'm working on this direction, although the economics are still complicated for me to figure out, not only for cars, but also for electricity in the home. It's difficult to make the right cost comparisons. Also, there's subsidies on some of these things. And
yeah, like I said, there's so many that I could have gotten into that there wasn't time. Put my email address in the chat. If anybody wants to follow up with questions or helping to work on the economics of this,
right.
I've I've got what I call the triple play at my house. I've got 2 EVs, solar PV, and geothermal. So I've kind of
Yeah.
I'm the poster child for all. I mean, we still have a gas stove I got to get rid of, but going all in all on electrifying everything, and it's been great.
That's great. Thank you so much.
You're going to soon be off the grid.
No, well, yeah, the grid's my backup. That's my backup. So
That's great. Thank you again, Ron. Thank you
Thanks,
very
Ron.
much.
It's great talking to
care.
everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.